Staff meeting minutes refer to welcome to Sophie Beckett and Graham Lamond. Item 2, we have no money. The cars are out of registration. The telephones are going to be cut off. There is no money for fuel. Is this the end of the organisation? And of course, I mean, Sophie and I went back to this farmhouse going, what the... I started at the Western Aboriginal Legal Service in Dubbo here on the 14th of February 1994. There were in fact 17 directors, the principal solicitor and the coordinator, who was a Koori gentleman at that time, Noel Gillen. The principal solicitor was Brian Hancock, and the 17 directors and those two were sitting in a circle in this room. So when it was my turn for the interview, I was called in, I poked my head into this room, walked in, looked at this circle of humans, 19 people, and saw a chair in the middle. And they said, come in and take a seat. And I went, what, there? In the middle of this amazing circle. And they said, no, over here. And then I noticed there was a chair just next to Brian Hancock. So I sat down there and was interviewed then by 17 people, because Brian and the coordinator didn't ask any questions, but an incredible experience. But shortly thereafter, after we'd set ourselves up, changed our world, left everything we knew behind, etc., there was a staff meeting. The staff meeting minutes refer to welcome to Sophie Beckett and Graham Lamond. Item 2, we have no money. The cars are out of registration. The telephones are going to be cut off. There is no money for fuel. Is this the end of the organisation? And of course, I mean, Sophie and I went back to this farmhouse going, what the fuck have we done to ourselves to be involved in this organisation? But that's just, I suppose, typical of the way the organisation not was run, but ran, in the sense that at that time, I understand, ATSIC was involved. It just was always a precarious situation in terms of when the next cheque was going to come in. And of course, as soon as you arrived at the WALS in those days, you were just inculcated into this tradition of how the place was run on a smell of an oily rag, and the stories that were handed down that Eric still tells with great passion about how people like Tombo Winters, William Bates and others would actually go shearing to get money so there would be fuel for the 3 lawyers who were then sharing a wage, Stephen Fitzpatrick and Eric Wilson, and I understand it was Anna Smith, so they could actually go to court. You weren't doing it for the money, you certainly weren't. You were doing it out of some sort of commitment to providing services to Aboriginal people in Western New South Wales. But I very quickly realised that it was a very privileged position you were in, as well as a sort of the perception being that you were doing something which was noble. And I remember some silly people in Sydney that I was talking to one time about what I did out here. They actually sort of said, we often think, we'd love to do that, you're fighting the good fight, we'd like to be able to do that. And my response was, why the fuck don't you? What is stopping you? There is nothing stopping you. Of course there isn't. You have this bizarre perception about what we actually do. On the day-to-day basis, it was hard slog. You were a member of a very tight-knit team that became your family, for want of a better word. Certainly they were your colleagues. Also, you socialised with them. It was a 7-day-a-week sort of job, more like a lifestyle, in the sense that if you weren't travelling on a Sunday to get to one of the outlying courts, late Friday or early Saturday morning, you were coming home. So your weekends were interrupted. There were often staff meetings, particularly when I became more senior in the organisation, staff meetings that occurred often in Cobar, most often in Cobar, which you'd have to travel to, and they were conducted on the weekends. So it certainly became much more than the job. You quickly realised what a privilege it was to work for the organisation, because the communities that you were going out and servicing had a sense that you belonged to them, but not in sort of a nasty proprietal way. They saw the service you were giving, and so you had this sense of protection within those communities. When I first started, I spent a lot of time in Bourke. Go up there with Dina, Yahya, and the field officer up there at that time was Clancy McKellar, and so the three of us spent a hell of a lot of time up there. We would go to Brewarrina and no one other than a WALS solicitor had turned up there in years. So it was basically the two WALS solicitors who ran everything in that court, and the magistrates would certainly take some time to be broken into that way of doing it. And so rather than demanding at 10 o'clock that everything be mentioned, they would allow us basically to tag team. And so we would be at the police station at 8 o'clock. In those days, you weren't given copies of records. You were lucky if you got the fact sheet. You would usually get a copy of the fact sheet, but so we would be copying down the records of everyone we believed it would be our client, which was almost 99% of the files that the police prosecutor had. Then we'd get McKellar would start rounding people up, people who hadn't made their way to court. He would go and try and track people down. That would involve him zooming up to Ingonia, 90 kilometres north, and picking up people there and bringing them down. And people would just come and patiently wait for us to see them at court, and we would just work our way through the list. And so, as I say, we tag team. So if I was ready with half a dozen offenders, I'd go in and deal with their matter and then swap with the other lawyer that was up there. I've come to think of it, as I've become more experienced, as cowboy advocacy. There's no way we were doing a professional, perfect job for each of those offenders, as in later years, particularly with the Legal Aid Commission, the resources that we were able to throw at each individual. There's no way we were throwing that sort of resource or that sort of time to each of those people. And the worst example I give is one time, just due to sheer lack of bums on seats in the organisation, I did the Bourke local court for a week by myself. I calculated later that meant that I represented 70 odd people in 1 week, and that was 2 list days, the Bourke list day and a Brewarrina list day, with about 20 odd, 32 I think in Bourke one day and 29 in Brewarrina the next. And then there were hearings that I did. I think I did 5 hearings one day and that sort of thing. I mean, there's no way anyone could say that was quality representation. It was just, I did what had to be done. But I still talk about that with a level of pride that I was able to get through that. And as it turned out, some of the decisions I made about the cases raised a couple of interesting legal points, which we were successful ultimately in arguing and having the matters dismissed. So at least I was able to identify that despite the pressures on that day. We were getting out there and doing what we could with what we could. It's a terrible state of affairs where it is still underfunded, despite the work it is required to do.